What's up guys, I'm going to do another video here on my extras channel, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the 4K60 Pro capture card that Elgato just barely released. And I would post like a video like this on my main channel. I did post the first video up on my main channel just talking about the initial like specs and everything of it and the cost and release date and all of that on my main channel. But in this video I kind of want to focus on more of the capture card itself and kind of comparing it to the HD60 Pro and my situation and stuff, and just kind of like a little bit more detail and I guess rambling and stuff too, because that's just kind of what I like to do, and I want to kind of get some of my thoughts out here about this card. And I figure that video was more informative. This is a little bit more opinion and kind of how it applies to me and stuff, whereas if you were checking out that first video, you might be just wanting to buy that capture card, not really caring about how that applies to me. So that's why I'm uploading this here. So if you haven't checked out that video before, be sure and go and check that video out and then come back to this one. But the 4K60 Pro is a capture card that records 4K at 60 frames per second. Just as the name suggests, it's a great capture card, and it's amazing. Like, there's other 4K capture cards on the market, 4K60 ones especially, but those ones are ridiculously expensive. And on the Reddit thread that Elgato had about this earlier today, they somebody asked why it's so expensive, and like the answer that Elgato gave was just, hey, it's like half the price of all the other 4K capture cards on the market. Like, if you research any of those, it's going to be twice this price. And so I'm like, well, I didn't really like that answer. I was like, I mean, like the HD60 Pro is like 130, 140 bucks or something like that. It's not terribly expensive. And if you're serious about it, it's a great investment. But you're like tripling that price for the 4K60 Pro. And I mean, 4K 60 FPS is nice, and all, but it's like, it's probably not going to be completely like widely adopted for a little while at least, If you're like a YouTuber or something and you're not, too worried about quality, and even just most YouTubers in general, they don't really have to worry about this because only a small amount of people are going to be watching content in 4K. Also, another thing I failed to mention in my first video, dang it, is that this does not support HDR whatsoever. It doesn't, record HDR, and it doesn't have HDR pass-through either. So if you play a game like Horizon Zero Dawn or something like that, just any game that has HDR support in it, you won't be able to see that if you use the 4K60 Pro, which is really unfortunate and kind of dumb in my opinion, that like you're going to get a diminished experience using the 4K60 Pro over just plugging in an HDMI cable from like say your PS4 into your TV. I don't know, it's kind of weird. But another thing that kind of bugs me a little bit about this, and that I mean, I don't know if it's Elgato's fault necessarily, is that if you have this capture card is essentially worthless unless you have a 4K TV or monitor. So say, okay, I guess I'll talk about like the PS4 Pro in this instance, since the Xbox One X isn't technically out yet, but it's like the same exact thing on that console. If you don't have a 4K TV or 4K monitor, the options for the PS4 Pro to output at those resolutions, you can't do it. It won't output at those settings, which, kind of upsets me a little bit. I'm like, let me output whatever resolution I want. I'll decide, what resolution I view it in, with my TV, but just let me choose what resolution the console outputs at. Like, I don't understand why there has to be this, like, block that, you can't, there's some games that benefit from the 2160p 4K mode on PS4 Pro or something like that. But if you have a 1080p TV, it's like, nope, it won't do anything. And there's even some games that run the exact same on a PS4 Pro as they do on a regular PS4 if you have the 1080p mode selected. So I would just like for you to be able to use the 2160p output on that console and, just have it super sample through your TV or through your monitor instead of having the console super sample it, or whatever. Like, instead of having the console render the game at 2160p and then super sample it and output it 1080p, just render it that way and output it at 4K, and just have my monitor or TV, downsample it and super sample it down to 1080p. Like, it's not that hard. And so I'm not sure if this is Elgato's fault, if there's a way that Elgato could do this, because the HDMI cable goes from the back of the PS4 Pro or whatever into the HD60 Pro or the 4K60 Pro, and then from there an HDMI cable out to your monitor. So I was wondering if, like, with a capture card like this, if there'd be a way to be able to like trick the console into thinking that like the output or the TV is 4K always, so that way you'll always have that option no matter what. Because I mean, at least if you're not viewing it at 4K, you could still record it at 4K. But if you don't have a 4K TV or a 4K monitor, you won't be able to benefit from this card whatsoever, because your PS4 Pro or whatever will output at 1080p, but you'll be capturing at 4K, which doesn't make a difference. It literally makes no difference if you capture a 1080p, game at 4K or at 1080p, because the output resolution is still the exact same. So it makes no sense. So I'm wondering, I really wish that Elgato, like I kind of want to understand like Sony's perspective, how this all works a little bit more, and wondering if like there was anything Elgato could have done about this to make sure that you always have that option, even if you don't have a 4K TV or monitor, that you can still output your PS4 Pro at 4K at 2160p. I don't know, that was just me rambling a little bit. Yeah, so that just kind of bugs me a little bit. Also, another thing is you're going to need a GPU for this. It does not have an H.264 encoder in it, which really kind of bugs me a little bit, because that's something I love about my HD60 Pro, is that since it has its own like built-in encoder and everything, it just works, and I don't really have to worry about it. Like, I have a pretty old CPU. It's like an i5 3340, and it's clocked at 3.1 gigahertz. It's a quad core. It's a pretty decent CPU. But when I'm using my Elgato software and when I'm recording, I usually get about 30% utilization, and I can still do other things in the background on my computer. Like, I can still have Chrome open. I could even have like Premiere or something open. If I was rendering a video, that would be a little bit too much, and that would put too much strain on it, in my opinion. But I could still multitask and do things in the background because of it. Whereas some other capture cards, like I think the Game Capture HD, not the HD60 Pro, but the regular one, the 1080p 30 FPS one, I think that one did not have its own encoder in it, so it relied heavily on the CPU. I don't even think they had GPU support back then. And so like when you're using that, if you didn't want the files to screw up or you didn't want anything bad to happen, then you just had to have only the Elgato software open, or a really awesome CPU. Whereas I really love the HD60 Pro, since it's its own discrete little like PCIe card. It just goes into my computer, it just works. I've had problems in the past with the stupid USB cords with it, like my old Game Capture HD, the 30 FPS one. The cord went out on that, or something went out. I think it was the port on the like capture card itself, and so it just kept disconnecting. So like every like couple seconds the screen would go black, and then Elgato would choke and everything, and like it was just impossible to play on, because my screen would go black for a few seconds, and then it would like act like there was no HDMI plugged in, and then my console would freak out and everything, and it just was a mess. And so my capture card started doing that, and I was like, fetch, well, this sucks. So then I bought an HD60, and that worked for a little while, and then after a few months that started having this exact same problems and stuff, and I was just getting so upset with that. I hated that card. I actually hated. And like I tried so many different things. I contacted Elgato, and they're like, oh, it's a problem with your USBs on your computer, da 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 da. And I'm like, I've tried it with different computers, and it's the same problem. And it was just a whole mess. I probably explained it in the past somewhere, but then I ended up getting an HD60 Pro about a year and a half ago, and that I love it because I don't have any of those problems. Since it's a PCIe one, it doesn't have any of this disconnection issues like the HD60 or the Game Capture HD did, whereas those were like, oh, is your USB plugged in? Is the Game Capture plugged in? Whereas it's like an HD60 Pro, it wouldn't be like, oh, is your PCIe plugged in? Oh, did you unplug your capture card from your PCIe? It's like, no. If I had to do that, I would have to unscrew my case and like pull out my like PCIe card, and nobody's gonna do that. Whereas like if it's like a USB card, yeah, you could easily just like reach over, pull out a USB. So I was glad that there wasn't any of those stupid issues with it. I really love that the 4K60 Pro has 140 megabits per second. That is awesome. It'll make editing so much better. It won't make it easier because there'll be so much data, and I would say you're gonna have to have a pretty beefy GPU and CPU and everything to use a 4K60 Pro. That's why they recommend an i7 6th gen CPU. I mean, they just released 8th gen CPUs. So, I mean, if you bought a computer within the last little while, then you'll be fine. So they say like an i7 like 6000 series. So if you have like a 6700 or a 6600, something like that, you'll be just fine. But if you have like a 7700K or even a brand new like 8700K, that'll be just fine. You'll like absolutely be amazed with that. But it'll just make editing and video and content creation so much better, because the resolution itself will make, you know, images and the video and everything sharper, but also with the amount of bitrate on there too, it'll make like color corrections and anything like that so much easier. That way, like if things go on in the game, such as like an explosion or something, even with like I would say with like the regular HD60 that recorded at 40 megabits per second, that was still a little even too low in some, you know, in some situations where you'd see all this artifacting and stuff, just because, you know, there was too much data and it could only record at 40 megabits per second. So 140, it's over double of what the HD60 Pro did. But I mean, even still, it's like the 140 megabits per second, that's only basically for people who have, like, that's just basically for the content creators. No viewer or, you know, content people like consuming the content are going to benefit from that. I mean, they will, you know, with like color correction and stuff, but there's no way that anybody's going to be able to watch that 140 megabits per second like clips or video unless, you know, they're like watching it on your local computer, or you upload it to like a separate website like Digital Foundry does. They have like digitalfoundry.net where they upload their own like captures and stuff to it, where you can see them in higher quality than YouTube, because YouTube does, I want to say, like a 30 FPS 4K video, and the bit rate is 35 to 45 megabits per second, and if you have 60 FPS, it's 53 to 68, which is like, ooh, you know, it's still not that great. And like a regular 1080p 60 FPS bitrate on YouTube is 12 megabits per second. So if you upload a video, say with 15, you're still, you know, it's still way higher than, you know, what people will be able to watch it as on YouTube. So if you record like a clip or something with this card at 4K 140 megabits per second and you upload that to YouTube, people aren't going to be able to see the difference between if you recorded it at 4K, you know, 60 FPS at 68 megabits per second or at 140. Nobody on YouTube is going to be able to tell the difference. But personally for me, I love having it, you know, a higher bit rate, you know, personally, just because when I watch them locally, it looks better and it's better for editing and stuff. So it matters to me. $400 is freaking nuts, because you're going to need a 4K monitor. You're going to need a really dope like i7 CPU. You're going to need apparently a GeForce 10 series GPU. You're going to need a pretty like gnarly hard drive solution, because it records about 1 gigabyte per minute if you have the 4K 140 megabits per second 60 FPS thing selected. Yeah, and you know, your CPU is probably going to be pegged. Your CPU and GPU is probably going to be pegged all the time, even with an i7 or something like that, you know, a 6th gen or a 7th or an 8th gen, you know, just because it doesn't have its own encoder in it, which kind of, you know, bothers me and like kind of boggles my mind why it doesn't have its own encoder. But I don't know, whatever. So there you guys go. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.